What's up, everybody? Welcome to another primary source walkthrough. This time we have Charles Lindbergh's America First speech that he gave on April 23rd, 1941. There's a lot to talk about here, and a couple of things to get us started. We need to know who Lindbergh is. And Lindbergh is most famous for his piloting. So, as the introduction notes here, Charles Lindbergh in 1927 flew a solo flight nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean on a plane called the Spirit of St. Louis. The Spirit of St. Louis, it was a small propeller plane. It's actually hanging up in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. When I went and I saw it for the first time, I was really struck by how small the plane is. But, given that it's 1927 when he makes this flight, and air travel was fairly new, if not brand new at that point, I suppose that makes sense. It's really striking. In any case, Lindbergh, when he makes that flight, is he immediately becomes a celebrity. And not only that, there's some really interesting kind of crime drama that happens. His child is kidnapped, and that becomes a big part of the news. You can Google around for that if you're interested in it. But the Lindbergh baby kidnapping is one of these, like, I'm trying to think of what it would be like now. And in 2020, I mean, there's so many bizarre political stories, like, I don't even know what would rise to the level. I mean, we live in unprecedented times. But in any case, Lindbergh's a pretty famous guy. Now, when he makes his flight and he's over in Europe, he gets to spend some time. And one of the things that he does is he visits Germany. And it happens that when Mr. Lindbergh was visiting Germany, our least favorite mustachioed Nazi was in charge of the government. And in fact, Hitler had decorated Lindbergh. And as things started to accelerate towards World War II, Lindbergh was even trying to get the United States government to negotiate with Adolf Hitler. This is to say that Charles Lindbergh has some, let's just say, anti Semitic skeletons hiding in his closet. And that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind here while he is talking about non-intervention. It's the America First Committee, whom he is addressing here, has a pretty significant racist history. And it is typically interpreted that way, which is why when the current president of the United States trotted out America First, everybody who remembers the America First movement from World War II just absolutely lost their minds. Like, come on, man! Like, you know better, or at least you should know better. So, the main point that Lindbergh is trying to make in this speech is he's trying to convince others. He's kind of preaching to the choir here, but he wants to keep the United States out of the European conflict. And look, this is in 1941. Hitler's already done a lot. So by now, he has not only invaded Poland, invaded Austria, or annexed Austria, I should say. Basically, everything that we know him to be an aggressor. The world knows him to be an aggressor. The the British, the French, the Russians have already committed to war against him. Not that the French lasted long, because Hitler took care of them real quick. But anyway, Lindbergh here knows the score, and we already knew what Hitler was doing to Jews. The scope of the death camps, how much we knew, and how many details we knew, is a question. I honestly don't know the answer. That's something you can look into. But we certainly knew that Hitler had orchestrated several pogroms, anti-Jewish violence, in Germany and other places. The ghettoization had already started happening. The camps had been built. Jews were being deported at this point. We knew something was going on. Now, did we know about crematoria quite yet? That's what I'm not sure. But it was very clear to the majority of the world that Adolf Hitler posed a existential threat to so much of not just the Western world, but the Eastern world. And he had allied himself with some pretty unsavory regimes as well, including Fascist Italy and Imperial Japan. And Japan committed unbelievable atrocities in the name of spreading their empire. If you look at the rape of Nanjing, you'll see what I mean. In any case, Charles Lindbergh knows this. He knows all of this, but he's still advocating that we stay out of it. And this speech they're his reasons why. And basically what it comes down to, as he says, is that non-intervention, isolationism, is a policy that leaves us free to follow our own way of life and to develop our own civilization. He's following Washington here. Washington did say stay out of foreign wars. He's not lying. The Monroe Doctrine does warn us to keep out of foreign entanglements. And this is how he believes that the United States becomes the greatest nation in the world. And he says that we have to take care of our own. That isolation, or non-intervention as he would say, is not isolation, it's independence. It's not defeat, it's courage. It's what would be our success. And he frames it in this speech in a very kind of military way. He's talking about, well, what are the military advantages of keeping ourselves out of this war? Like, nobody's going to bother us. If they did, they're at a disadvantage. And he says, right here, practically every difficulty we would face in invading Europe becomes an asset to us in defending America. What he's saying is, like, look, people would have to come here. Okay, other nations would have to come here and try to invade us. Which, what would that lead to for them? Well, our battleships and submarines would be really close to their home bases. We would be bombing from our air bases. I mean, they can't get past all of our stuff. And so we're better situated than any other nation in the world. I think he's exaggerating here. Germany was far superior, as far as I know, in terms of their technology. The problem was Hitler tried to do too much. He was not a very good military commander. He wasn't really good at anything. Let's just be honest. He's forgive my harsh language, but he's a giant piece of shit, and nobody should celebrate him in any way whatsoever. But anyway. Now, he is going to make another case for why we shouldn't enter this war. And he says, look, our leaders are starting to talk about how we need to fight for freedom. And indeed, this is prior to Pearl Harbor, okay, so it's, a few months before it happens. But there's talk about whether or not we should intervene, and there are always voices in the American government that want us to go to war. If you look at some of the rhetoric around the country of Iran, for example, in 2020, when we're not thinking about the pandemic, I mean, there are people who desperately want to go to war with Iran, which I quite don't understand, but they exist. In any case, Lindbergh says, that it is time to listen to the majority of people. The majority of people, he says, don't want to go to war. It's going to change after Pearl Harbor, for sure. But instead, he says that we are being led to war by a minority of our people. This minority has power, it has influence, it has a loud voice, which he says right here. Now, I think in this case, what Lindbergh means is that he's not saying minority in terms of race or ethnicity. He's saying, most Americans don't want to get involved in this war. It's only the select few who want to get involved in this war. And he makes this interesting distinction, which is a hallmark of American politics sometimes. He says that these real Americans, okay, the majority of people, they don't have power, they don't have influence. They're just everyday average Joes who are working their jobs and don't want to deal with war again. After all, we just went through one. Now, he says they've relied on their votes, and basically these are the people that we need to listen to. As he says, they're the true strength of our country. We talk in our modern politics a lot about how there are quote unquote real Americans. So like one of the favorite tropes of of one political party says that the coastal elites do not represent real Americans, and they say, they imply that only people who live in rural Midwestern towns are the real Americans. And they accuse the other side of, neglecting the flyover states, etc., etc. And it's a cudgel that's used in politics. And it's distressing, I think, to see it when, we're debating between who is and who isn't a quote-unquote real American. Man, that always to me just seems a little bit off. In any case, he continues. And this is where I think he's starting to tip his hand towards his anti-Semitism. So, in this underlined portion, he says, such a time has come, such a crisis is here. That is why the America First Committee has been formed, to give voice to the people who have no newspaper, no newsreel, or radio station at their command, to the people who must do the paying and the fighting and the dying if this country enters the war. There's no, hit you in the face anti-Semitism, but when people start talking about how the newspaper, radio stations control things, that's usually an anti-Semitic dog whistle. When you see these sorts of things where you're talking about media control, etc., usually that is kind of a hand tip, if you will, towards, saying the Jews are trying to orchestrate control, etc. And if you're struggling to believe that, you need to look into some of the tropes or the common themes that are put out in anti-Semitic propaganda. Hitler did the same sort of thing, not to go all Godwin's Law on you, but he did. It continues even now. There's a serious critique to be made of American media, but to suggest that the American media has direct control over its citizenry kind of tips its hand towards those things. It's it's bad stuff. And if you're like, well, but Lindbergh isn't saying it here, why would we believe this? Well, a few months later, on September 11th, 1941, he gives another speech in Iowa, and he accuses the Jews directly of trying to drag us into war. He says that Britain and Roosevelt have a lot to do with it as well, but I mean, he singles out the Jews, which kind of, I think that tips his hand. And to me, that, looking at this and knowing who he was and whatnot, I can't help but read that as kind of an anti-Semitic dog whistle. But you be the judge. You're interpreting the primary source here, so if you disagree with that interpretation and you want to write a primary source reflection about this and defend Lindbergh, I mean, you're more than welcome to. Just, think about context and think about how all these things work together. So, all that said, I'm going to wrap this up. I apologize for the weird breaks in this video. My dog started barking at kids skateboarding outside a couple times, so had to stop for a while. Anyway, if you have questions about Charles Lindbergh's primary source or anything about the America First movement, don't hesitate to reach out, and we will talk for the next one soon. Talk to you later, guys. Take care of yourselves.